Hello.
Hello, Mr. Adam.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Tough. It's a tough world. Tough day.
Top day, wow. Probably it's like the end of the week, so
I hope so. All right. Good over there, I think. Here comes everybody. Chemistry must have just ended. Can you see the Pear Deck code? Yep, you can. There it goes. Everybody coming in fast and furiously. We'll get started in just a minute. Now we can go gallery. There we go. All right. Logging into those Pear Deck slides. We're going to be using actually two different slide decks today. One new one and then the one that you used yesterday that has all of your answers or your thinking from our deep data dive. We'll start here. All right. We've got just about everybody. All right. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see your faces, your tiny faces. We're going to start with our check-in. It's a new one. It's called 2 Words. I'll tell you a little bit about it in a second, but my hope is we can begin to build off of what we did the other day in respect to noticing and naming what we're feeling or what we're thinking, and then maybe even set the intention over the weekend, this holiday weekend, right, to do something that takes care of ourselves, to be kind to ourselves along the way. We do want to finish the deep data dive that we started last time, so I want to give you some time to work independently on that. And we can come back together and do what I'm calling a virtual gallery walk. If you've done a gallery walk before, you know there's little displays set up, and you move around the room and take a look at other people's work, maybe leave some feedback along the way. With Zoom, I'm not exactly sure how that would work. So instead, what I'm going to ask is, of those 5 different figures, one of which you've been assigned, let's pick maybe 2, maybe 3 to go over as a large group, and we'll do our gallery walk together. So we're all looking at the same thing at the same time. We'll take our break so halfway in between, and my goal is to spend the last 10 or 15 minutes of class connecting to what you've been doing for homework in the form of your Edpuzzle videos. There's been one video on the differences between autotrophs and heterotrophs. That one was probably pretty straightforward. And then there was a second video on food webs and trophic structure and energy flow. So hopefully we can connect not only to those videos, but also to what we're going to do in class as well. So can I do anything to make your lives a little bit easier, a little bit happier this afternoon? Okay. Well, I say it a lot. I'll keep saying it. Chat, remind, email, take yourself off mute. I'd love to hear your voices. Do you realize there's some of you who I honestly don't know what you look like, let alone what you sound like?
Yes, I love not having my face not be recognized, Mr. Bergeron.
Yes, thank you, Audie. There's some people that I do know. I'm talking about those who I don't.
What if we just want to be nebulous human beings?
That is a choice that you get to make.
I feel like this could be a fun game, like have Mr. Bergeron guess who's who on the first day of real classes.
It would be fun. You're all going to be wearing your masks too. All I'll have is your eyes. Heck, I'll be wearing mine too, right? We'll see. All right. Well, let's do our check-in. I'd actually like to start this check-in, even though it's a new one and a different one, in a way that we did last time. So I would invite you, if you're willing and interested, to find a position where you can sit comfortably. I often describe this as a position where you can sit comfortably but confidently, upright but relaxed. And just by taking a deep breath, allow yourself to kind of sink into your seat a bit. Just let go. Be as present as you can right now. If you'd like today to put your hands on your heart to make that physical connection to your body, the task is simple. What 2 words come to mind about whatever it is that you're thinking about or feeling in this particular moment? And whenever you're ready, you can just write those words or type those words right in those boxes. Try to write my own words today. Right. Looks like about 3/4 of you have started writing or finished writing, so start taking a look at what you've come up with. Mine were sadness and fatigue. Okay. I can only imagine who wrote that. It's because chemistry is scary.
Mr. Bergeron, I'm sorry I was late today. Mr. Crone made me stay and memorize that the mitochondria was the powerhouse of the cell because I just forgot earlier today in class. So
It's understandable. It's an important life lesson, right?
yeah, he said I couldn't get into college without it.
You probably won't.
Okay, Mark, I'll give you your $2.
That would require you to see each other and come in physical contact with one another. That seems unwise.
He can just Venmo him.
Guess
We're
that's-
in the same group. He can just set it down on a desk. and then I'll walk over 30 minutes later.
Fair enough. So just before we move forward, I'm glad this class is in a slightly different place than me personally, but also other classes as well. Probably that speaks to who you are as individuals. But really, this is just an exercise in noticing and naming and then being kind to yourself. That's the next step, right? And hopefully today, even with the 40 minutes or so that we have left, maybe we can remember why biology is so darn interesting in the first place. It's one of those things that keeps me coming back as I try to be kind to myself and remember why I'm doing this in the first place. So thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Here's actually what I'm going to do. I am going to move you over to the slide deck that we were working with on Wednesday, because that's the slide deck that has all of your answers, all of your work on it. So probably the easiest way to do this, just like you were logging at the beginning of class, just go ahead and use the code from Wednesday. Okay, it's working well. Again, we're just using this code because it has all of your work on it. All right. So that code will be in the upper right-hand corner if you need it. So hopefully you remember your group number. Remember the group number matches the figure number that you're working with, okay? And before I give you control of the slides, just a reminder, your goal is to look at the figure, probably read those 2 paragraphs. If you haven't already done so, make sense of the figure to the best of your ability, make meaning, okay? And then do your best to answer those 3 questions on the right-hand side on the slide that follows, okay? And once I give you control, you should be able to see all of your responses, okay? I'm thinking maybe about 8 minutes to wrap up what you started on Wednesday, okay? That way I can be here to support you if you have any clarifying questions or just are curious about what it is that you're looking at. You don't have to sit there and struggle, you can ask. But I'll check in with you in about 8 minutes, and then maybe we can do our first figure together, our first gallery walk together, and we can take a break, and then if you'd like, we can do one more after that. All right? All right. What questions do you have for me before we get started? All right. Well, I will give you control. Okay. Hopefully you can find your figure, your answers if you started writing something on Wednesday. If you find yourself finishing early, feel free to try another one. All of these are coming from released AP exams. Okay, they're all practice for the free response sorts of questions that you would see on the AP exam. So if you finish one, try another one. Can't hurt.
Mr. Bergeron.
Yeah.
I'm working on question 4,
Sure.
and for like part 2, I was curious, like I couldn't find that information in the paragraph.
So everything you need is in this slide. So as you think about, and now that doesn't mean there's going to be a sentence necessarily, right, where it's going to give you the answer. This isn't a worksheet that I'm asking you to fill out. As you look at the data, right, as you look at the evidence, especially for the bumblebees, I love this figure. What is this chemical appearing to do for bumblebees? Or better yet, what are the bumblebees doing to the plants that make this chemical? See the blue line kind of going up? Yeah. Clearly a significant difference, right? I'm just looking at the blue line between generation 11, and you could argue anything earlier than generation 7, including generation 7 for that matter. So here are these bees, right? I love this stuff. It amazes me. Here are these bees, and they're buzzing around this population of brassica plants, right? But clearly they're going to visit some of those plants more often than others. There's got to be a reason why they're visiting some of these plants more so than others. And it turns out that some of these plants, because of that good old natural variation in the population, they're pumping out more of this para-anisaldehyde than others are. And the bees are noticing that. And they're landing on those flowers, those plants preferentially. And they're allowing those plants to reproduce in a way that they may not have been able to reproduce in the past. And over the course of time, I mean, 11 generations doesn't seem like a very long time, and it's not. For this plant, it's about a year and some change. The population shifts, right? This is directional selection. This is natural selection occurring in one direction in such a way that now that population is much more representative of individuals that pump out this chemical in very high amounts than in lower amounts. And that same effect, it's not noticed with the hoverflies. You can even argue the hoverflies want nothing to do with this chemical, because they're selecting for individual plants in the population that don't make very much of it, or any of it at all. So what's its role? It's an attractant for the bees. It's a repellent for the hoverflies. The plants are talking to the pollinators, but they're speaking a chemical language. Come on, where are my nerds? You're right, geeks. All right. So that's just about 8 minutes. Let me do a quick check-in. If you need some more time, that's okay, but I want to find out how much more, if any. So remember, a fist is 0, finger is a minute. If you can turn your camera on, otherwise pop something in the chat real quick. How much more time you need to finish interpreting your figure and answering those 3 prompts. Again, for those of you who have your cameras off, I can't see your fingers, so just give me a little bit of feedback so I know how much longer you need. All right, let's take like maybe 2.5 minutes to wrap things up. Then we'll come back together and we'll pick one of these that you want to tackle together. All right, so try to find a good spot to wrap up. And either with fingers or in the chat, if you were to vote for one of these figures to start with, which one would it be? Got a couple. If you don't vote, I assume you don't care. I see some ones popping up. You can definitely start with number 1. Right. Well, I love this paper. I love these figures because I'm a geek, right? And maybe you are too. Because even like those 2 paragraphs, that intro up there, like the term phytotron, I'm like, phytotron, that sounds cool. I want to go there. Is that an Autobot? Is that a Decepticon? I have to know, right? It's not. It's a big greenhouse, right? It's a big greenhouse where all these plants are being raised under controlled conditions. And one of the conditions that the investigators are playing around with is the presence or absence of these different pollinators, right? Bumblebees versus hoverflies. But maybe you were wondering about the black line, because really at the bottom, it's only identified as the control. Folks, they were hand pollinated with a paintbrush. Yes, that could be your job as an undergraduate, or yes, that could be your job as a graduate student. It's the wonderful world of science, okay? So obviously hand pollinated, no pollinating insects are present in that environment. So if we start there with that line, so I bring my pen up, maybe between generation 1 and generation 11, oh, that's a terrible color to use. There's an effect right? Where the population of plants now as a whole, on average, is slightly taller than it was at the beginning. I don't think I see any error bar overlap there. The error bars, though, are just single standard error of the mean value, so they're not 95% confidence intervals. We're about 67% confident, right? That our mean's going to fall somewhere within that range. But it's kind of interesting, right? That if this is the result of hand pollination, then the taller the plant is probably the one that the paintbrush got to first. So the human being, right, was selecting for taller plants by doing so. So there's that piece of the puzzle. That's the control. The others are the pollinators, right? Blue is the bumblebee, green is the hoverfly. And I think similar to, here, let's get rid of the ink. Similar to the hand pollination, I think there's a significant difference, right? Between generation 1 and generation 11 over time. And again, 11 generations is a year and some change for these plants, okay? That the bumblebees, right, have selected for taller plants in the population. Those plants were not only surviving, but now reproduced successfully because they were pollinated. And more of their kind, more of their progeny, more of their offspring appeared in the next generation as a result. In over 11 generations, the overall population of plants, on average, grew progressively taller and taller and taller. Bumblebees appear to prefer taller plants. But the hoverflies? I guess you could argue initially, and through most of the experiment, they appeared to prefer shorter plants. But at the end, by generation 11, I don't know, it's a little hard to say for sure, but I think those error bars are awfully close to overlapping. Doesn't appear to be a significant difference between, you know, those two generations, those two time points. Hoverflies don't appear to prefer larger or shorter plants. Taller plants, bumblebees like you, you're more likely to be pollinated, everybody wins. Hoverflies, you don't seem to care, right? You'll probably pollinate any flower on any plant, regardless of how tall it is. So hopefully we've addressed the claims, right? We've really made a claim for each of those three conditions, the control, the bumblebees, and the hoverflies. The relationship between pollination and plant height, well, it looks like at least for the bumblebees, and maybe even for the hand pollination, right, that taller plants are more likely to be pollinated. Right? Hoverflies, though, they don't seem to exhibit a preference. And how might a change in the height of the plant lead to a higher level of fitness? Well, if you're being pollinated, you're having the sexy time, right? Now the bee is kind of your intermediary, right? It's moving the pollen, it's moving the sperm from flower to flower, plant to plant, right? But you're more successfully able to reproduce due to the influence of that pollinator, the bumblebee, right? If you're a taller plant compared to if you're a shorter plant.
Mr. Berger.
Yeah.
So if you were to stop at like 7 generations, you would see like very different things.
Yeah.
So how do you know that those aren't just fluctuations and not like actual changes?
Well, I think, and it's a great question, Mark, right? I mean, the data are our data, right? We have to use what we got. So if I'm comparing before and after, right? Initial and final, I'm going generation 1 and generation 11. But I hear what you're saying, right? Well, wait a minute, what if we never went out that far? What if we stopped at generation 7? Well, you would make a very different claim, right? I think you could even argue for the hoverfly, right? That there is a preference for shorter plants. It's one of the reasons why we keep these experiments going over multiple generations. We want to ensure that what we think we're seeing is actually what's happening within the population. And I think by the end, by generation 11, we can't support the claim that hoverflies, in a significant manner at least, are preferring shorter plants over taller plants. They don't seem to care. But I can certainly see, and this is where AP biology can get a little murky for some people. I think you're so conditioned to coming up with the answer. What's the answer? In fact, better yet, Mr. Bergeron, tell me the answer. I'm really good at memorizing. I will give that answer back to you. sorry, folks. If you can ever find a job where somebody pays you to tell them what they already know, hold on to that job for your entire life. Spoiler alert, those jobs don't exist.
Why do you compare to the starting condition instead of the control at the end?
I think you could do it for the control as well, right? Now, when you say compare, are you going to compare the hoverflies to the black line or the bumblebees to the black line?
Yeah, like the hoverflies to the so comparing the 3 at 11 generations.
Well, I think what we would say is that we're trying to investigate the effect of natural selection on this population of plants over the course of time, right? So if we're just looking at that one time point, generation 11, we could certainly say that, okay, well, at that time point, it looks like, bumblebees prefer the tallest plants. The hand-pollinated plants, well, they also seem to be preferentially receiving pollen if they're tall, but hoverflies, not so much, right? But that's at that one time point. If we look at this over the course of time, right, starting with the initial population and asking them the question, has that population changed over the course of time? We end up reaching a different conclusion because they all pretty much started in the same place. And what we're asking is, due to the influence of either the different pollinator or the paintbrush, how has that population changed over time? And when we look at initial compared to final, we're not seeing as significant of a change as we do for the hand pollination or the bumblebee pollinated plants. Short story long, folks, the claim that you make will vary. And that's okay. Maddie, if you approach this from the perspective of just generation 11 and you compared those 3 data points at generation 11, that's okay, right? Describe the relationship. Well, the relationship would be bumblebees prefer the tallest plants. Hand pollination yield also seem to provide a preference for taller plants over shorter plants. But hoverflies, if they preferred larger plants, preferred the shortest of the plants in the population compared to bumblebees and hand pollination. It's okay. You're using the evidence to support your claim, whatever your claim happens to be. There's not one correct answer here. There's many different answers that can be supported by the evidence based on how we look at it. What other questions are bebopping around in your minds? All right, why don't we take our break? We're a little past the halfway point. Let's come back together at 1:36. And if you like, we can try one more of these. Otherwise, we can move on to something different, but related. All right, I'll see you in a few minutes. All right, if we could start making our way back together. All right, would it be helpful to do one more together? Thumbs up. Yes. Thumbs down. I'm ready for something new, but related. A lot of thumbs up with people who are on camera, not a lot of feedback from people who aren't. Want to make sure that you're represented as well. Well, not an overwhelming, overwhelming vote. Let's see. Anybody want to try number 5? 5's great because it's actually a chi-square analysis. It brings us back to what we were doing earlier in the week. So this is a funky one, right? Same plants, same environment, same pollinators. We just have to be careful. We've lost our color scheme now. So where before bumblebees were blue and hand pollination was black and hoverflies were green. Now, a couple things you can actually see. Oops, sorry. There's that hand pollination piece that I mentioned. It is indeed the control, okay? But this time we just have to be careful. Bumblebees are in light gray and hoverflies are in the dark gray. So now what we're looking at are the number of plants that are nectarless. And I'll say from the get-go that the plants that you started with, these brassica plants that you started with, were producing small amounts of nectar. Their flowers aren't very big, but they do produce a little bit of nectar. So looking at the data, okay, 11 generations again. So we started with an original population. We exposed those 3 subpopulations to either hand pollination or bumblebees or hoverflies. And we looked to see how the population changed over the course of time, but this time in the context of the number of nectarless plants. The NS that you see, any predictions as to what the NS represents in a figure like this?
Not shown.
Close. The data are shown in this case. We use that.
Not significant.
Yeah, it's not significant. So a chi-square test was performed, right, for these 3 categories, right, these 3 groups, hand pollination, bumblebee pollination, hoverfly pollination, at this one particular time point, generation 1 or 3 or 5 or 7, right? And then they looked to see if there was a significant difference between the numbers of plants that were nectarless in that particular generation. So no significant difference at generation 5. This looks like it could be significant at generation 7, but they did the statistical analysis. No significant difference there. But by the time you get to generation 9 and generation 11, oh, look, well, our NS's moved and they changed to asterisks. What do you think the asterisk represents?
Significant.
Exactly. Thank you, Sarah. So significant differences in generation 9 and generation 11, but this is kind of funky, right? Remember, our light gray bar are the bumblebee bars. The bumblebee pollinators are influencing the population, right? They're selecting for plants in the population that are more likely to be nectarless, right? And as a consequence, the numbers of those plants are going up. And those numbers, that increase in the number of nectarless plants is statistically significantly different than the effect of either hoverflies or hand pollination. And it looks like that same process is true, right, in generation 11. More bumblebee pollinators are leading to more nectarless plants in the population. Which might surprise you after lab number 6, right? Spent all that time collecting nectar from those virtual flowers, right? Collection rate, collection time, foraging time, all of those variables that you may have considered to manipulate. In the context of this experiment, if you're a bumblebee, you're selecting for plants that are nectarless. You're potentially eliminating your food source. But this isn't the natural environment, right? These are laboratory conditions. The bees have plenty of food. They're being provided all the nutrients that they need. So they can select for whatever characteristic in the plants that they want to select for. In this case, the absence of nectar. No harm, no foul, right? But it looks like in the case of the hoverflies in particular, they are certainly not selecting for nectarless plants in the same way that bumblebees are. They probably are still reliant upon nectar. And that's really the role of nectar in the first place, right? The insect arrives, it's delivering the pollen, but it's also feeding, right, and gaining some nutrition along the way. That's why these results are really surprising. It doesn't even seem to matter if the nectar is present, the bumblebees will still do whatever it is that they need to do. Why might that be favored by pollinators? Probably because they have an alternative food source. In this case, a laboratory provided food source. That would be very different, or you'd expect it to be very different, if the flowers the bees were pollinating were their only source of nutrition in a natural habitat. Wouldn't be a great idea for the bees to select against the very plants that were providing them their source of food. So it's me talking a lot again. I apologize. What questions or wonderings is this bringing to mind as you look at these data or any of the data? Are you ready for a slightly different example? Okay. So again, you've done some work, right, looking at interspecies interactions, but feeding relationships, right? Heterotrophs and autotrophs. Well, a heterotroph might eat an autotroph. That's an interspecies interaction. If you think about a food chain or a food web, what's eating what in the environment, in the system? Well, that's an interspecies interaction. So this interaction that we're wrapping up now between the pollinator and the flowering plant is one type of interaction that exists. We want to move and transition to a different type of interaction between two species. In this case, a feeding relationship. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. And actually, what I'm going to do is we don't need this anymore. Take us out of this one. And I'm going to bounce back to this one. I'm going to close that. And that was our check-in. So I need to scroll ahead a bit. Plenty of time. Alrighty. All right, so the feeding relationship that I want to show you is actually a relationship that some of you saw when we looked at a plant behavioral response a couple weeks ago. This is the one that was entitled, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name of it. Don't Eat Me, Bruh. If you remember, if you had that one. So I would imagine that a lot of people didn't get a chance to watch the video clip that was associated with this, even if you heard about the example of the plant behavioral response. So I want to show everybody the video clip first before we go any further. There's no sound. So I'm actually going to pause it here just for a second. Can you see the caterpillar up on the upper left-hand corner on the leaf? Okay. And then you can see the two caterpillars down here. Good. Rewind just a little bit. All right. Watch and enjoy. caterpillar doing what I think it's doing? Yep. Oh, brother, where art thou? So let's go back to the beginning here for a second. I'm noticing that you might not be able to see that first question, but we're looking at feeding relationships, right? So let's say we had an environment that didn't have any caterpillars in it, just the green plants. How is the energy moving in that particular system? Just a system that contains plants. What's the origin?
Sunlight.
Simple, right? Good old middle school. That's a terrible choice of colors. It's the sun. It has to be yellow, right? Okay. And I've got my green leafy plant. And what the heck? It's Friday afternoon.
Don't forget the sunglasses on the sun.
Oh, you're right. You're right. You know, if we were beginning to illustrate the transfer of energy, right? We know that light energy is being transferred from the sun to the plant. Plants perform their magic. It's not magic. And there's no mitochondria directly involved. The chloroplast is responsible for photosynthesis. It is the true powerhouse of the cell. But I digress.
Get wrecked, Mark.
So the energy is being transferred from the sun to the plant. Okay. What if I introduce the caterpillars? Now, how is the energy moving? You can draw in a little caterpillar here.
From the sun to the leaves to the caterpillars.
So terribly drawn caterpillars, but you get the idea, I hope. Again, this is not meant to be super complex. The energy is going to move from the plant to the caterpillar. And here's what's crazy, right? Because normally, and we can see this in the video clip, right? Normally, these caterpillars are feeding off of the plant. They're heterotrophs. They're first level consumers. They're herbivores. Most of the time. What ends up happening, and some of you already know this, what ends up happening is that when that plant begins to be eaten, it begins to release chemicals into the environment, much like Sarah had asked about a few minutes ago in scenario number 4 with, what was it, para-anisaldehyde, I believe, which is being used to attract the pollinators or repel the pollinators in the case of the hoverflies. This is similar, right? A chemical signal is being released from the plant, but this time we're not trying to attract pollinators or repel pollinators. In fact, what we're doing, or what the plant is doing with this chemical signal, is taking control of the caterpillar's nervous system. What? And the presence of that chemical changes the behavior of the caterpillar in a way where it stops eating the plant and starts eating its family. So we have one line that's missing, right? If caterpillars are eating the plant and the caterpillars are therefore present, and now one caterpillar decides, really is convinced, cajoled, forced into cannibalizing its friends, now where's the energy moving? We said light to plant, plant to caterpillar. What have we just added into the mix?
Another caterpillar.
Sorry, I tried to draw the other caterpillar. I hope you can see it. Isn't the energy moving now from one caterpillar to another? See if I can draw it. Oh, that's not what I want. That's a line. Let's see if we can do better than that. So it's a food chain, but it's a weird food chain because we can actually change the feeding relationship, right? We can, through an interspecies interaction, change the feeding relationship in a way where the caterpillars will begin to eat each other rather than eat the plant. And I'm just bringing this up because I think at this point, you folks are pretty darn intelligent. You can look at a food web and you can interpret it pretty easily. We're not going to spend a lot of time doing that in a class like this. Instead, we want to begin to think about how does natural selection influence the feeding relationships, the interspecies interactions that exist, right, within the system. Because if I'm a plant, okay, great, I'm an autotroph, I'm a producer, right? I'm producing all of the energy for everybody else in the system, but I don't want that to be everything I do. And I certainly don't want to be eaten to extinction. Oh, that's right. Because of natural variation, there might very well be characteristics that can be selected for that actually alter the behavior of the very creatures that are eating me so that they will eat less of me and more of each other instead. Happy Halloween, everybody.
In the diagram that you just drew with the arrows representing the energy transfer from the sun to the plant to the caterpillar to the cannibal, would other things be transferred to other than energy?
Nutrients, absolutely nutrients will be transferred. So carbohydrates and fats and proteins, amino acids, all of those things will be transferred. We're not really getting into that level. We're just kind of, vaguely, broadly describing the transfer as energy. Now, of course, one other thing that we didn't address either is that none of these feeding relationships involve the 100% energy efficient transfer, right? That there's all sorts of energy escaping to the surroundings in the form of heat as we do this. So this diagram is overly simplistic for sure. Sunglasses, not included. It's not even including all of the energy transfers that are taking place within the system. A good question.
Mr. Bergeron?
Yeah.
So you say that like energy leaves through the system through heat. And so obviously like even if cold-blooded creatures are moving around, they're creating heat through friction of moving and stuff, which gets rid of heat. But has anyone or is there a connection between more efficient energy transfer between cold-blooded creatures than warm-blooded creatures?
As in a warm-blooded creature is feeding upon a cold-blooded creature?
Yeah, so like from sun to energy to cold-blooded to warm-blooded, does that from that cold-blooded to warm-blooded, is it a greater percent because they're not creating their own heat?
No, but they still are. Cold-blooded creatures are still performing all of the processes that the warm-blooded creatures are producing. They're still releasing thermal energy to the environment. They're just, for some, we don't know which organism you're thinking about right now, but for some reason, they're not able to generate enough thermal energy to regulate their internal body temperature, and thus they're reliant upon external thermal energy, probably from the sun, from light, to raise their body temperature up to a level where they can actually survive. So in terms of energy transfer, it shouldn't be a big deal. The more interesting question would be, what if you had a really cold-blooded organism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And compared to a normal temperature warm-blooded organism, then the energy transfers might be really interesting to explore. And I don't have a clear, simple answer to your question, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, before you go, if you would, I'm hoping some of these examples gave you an opportunity to go, no way, or whoa, that's so cool. Simple drag your dot, right? Where did these examples land for you today? And as soon as you drag your dot, you're welcome to sign off. I will see you again on Monday afternoon. Please be well. Enjoy the holiday.
Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah.
Times you can't win.
In the Amoeba Sisters video that was in homework for mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism, for the commensalism, they said that it definitely examples of this exist in nature, but it's really rare. Why is that?
It's hard to find an example of an interaction where one species benefits and the other species involved in the interaction is neither helped nor harmed, or benefits or does not benefit. Mutualisms are far more common, and you would argue would be selected for, because both species are benefiting, right? In some way, shape, or form, their fitness is increasing because of the interaction. Where if you had two species that were interacting and one was benefiting, that certainly would be a selective, a positive selective pressure. But to experience no true benefit, well, then why are you doing it, right? So that's one of the reasons why they're rare. Doesn't mean they don't exist, just means that they're less common.
Would an example of that be seen mainly with like humans? Because well, actually, I was just thinking of all these relationships in terms of human interactions between ourselves, even though this is interspecies.
Mhm.
So, because humans have this idea of a conscience that we will do selfless acts. Do is that kind of the thing with other animals or but interaction between other organisms, or do they deem that the organism that is benefiting and they're not being harmed nor benefited, they're just insignificant?
Yeah, what you're referring to, Adi, is something biologically that's called altruism. And altruism is this notion of within a species. So to speak to your point, this is not interspecies. This is within the single species, that individuals clearly like to help each other, right? They like to support one another, and that can manifest itself in a wide variety of ways. But back in the early 20th century, some work was done with this idea of altruism, and what came out of it was this notion of kin selection. So really, really briefly, what this revealed is that, yeah, altruism is real, right? Individuals of a species like to help each other, oftentimes because it promotes the survival or reproductive success of the whole. But we sure as heck like helping people that are more closely related to us than who are not.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for letting me attending your lecture.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm just wonder, like when you do, like, for example, usually biology, we have like a lab experience. So do you let the student like come like with limited amount of people at the time on the lab or nothing at all?
No, the first quarter we did 6 virtual labs.
Mhm.
I still tried to promote inquiry, so I created experiences where they could choose a variable to manipulate, collect authentic data, original data, analyze that data statistically, and then make a claim which was supported by the evidence, and then build an explanation from that. So we do a lot of what we've always done, but no, as of now, students are not really, any number of students without special permission are not allowed in the building. So you can't do labs. And the schedule that we are expected to return to on the 9th, we're only going to see students 45 minutes every other day.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you still have to, that's some of the labs that we've done in the past take 90 minutes. And you don't have that time.
Okay.
And you can't pause and then come back to it 2 days later.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think we're still going to be in a virtual lab setting for the foreseeable future.
And you did the virtual lab, or it's still ongoing project?
There were 6 discrete experiences. They varied, but no, there were 6 separate experiences.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So I wonder how it's like how they build, the experience. But I've seen, on Google, sometimes, they have like a virtual tour. Actually, you click on that. For example, if you cannot go to Louvre Museum, you click on that and you have the virtual experience with the Louvre Museum. So is that same like that with the lab experience?
I would say no, not based on what I'm trying to set up. Like I'll
Mm.
bring them to a website that is like a Hardy Weinberg equilibrium simulator, right? So you run the simulation and the population doesn't evolve under the default conditions. And then they get a choice in terms of the variable that they want to manipulate. They collect data and then analyze that data to verify whether or not the population is now outside of equilibrium and mathematically, quantitatively has evolved. I think that that's the closest that I can get to what I would want them to be able to do in lab. I am very resistant to like me doing an experiment and recording myself doing the experiment and collecting data or sharing like sample data with them and then analyzing the data. It's like, no, they still need to do something with, even if it's virtual. That's one of the reasons why I started the year like I did with like natural selection and ecology. It is not molecular. I don't mind them doing simulations because if I'm doing a natural selection lab with them, well, that would have taken 50 generations anyway, and we never would have been able to do that in a classroom in the first place. But yeah, cells, molecules, enzymes, I want them to be able to work with those sorts of things. And that requires in-person learning.
So hopefully it's getting better. I saw that actually not high school, but elementary school, they're starting to get back.
Yeah, it's
So
not. It's not getting better.
Oh, okay.
Way worse.
Yeah, we just hope for the best. So yeah, it's usually high school like student. They at least they are more having awareness. But like with kids, children, it's hard to make them sit down and then watch the virtual section. So
yeah, I think it's hard for all of us. It's hard for the teachers as well. But I think that as a society, as a culture, as a collection of communities, we have to decide what's more important. And if we want school to be important, if we want kids to come back in the buildings, then we got to shut down everything else.
Yeah, true.
I don't know that we're going to do that.
Yeah, better like some kind of like an important section like restaurant or something like they can just close, and then school is more important, they can open. Yeah, but they want to save the economy, so all right, thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and happy Halloween, Mr. Bergeron. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Be well.
Bye-bye. Yes, thank you.